Hello again, everyone. Yaksamash. Welcome to Wrench Reads, Trilogy of Morgalla, Diary of a Lonely Demon, number 5. I've reached about the 61% mark in the reading that I'm doing for myself, reading ahead, and things are just starting to get interesting. The link for the book, if you want to get a copy, is in the info bar. Again, if this is the first Wrench Reads you've watched, click the annotation appearing on screen right now and go back to the introduction. So, this week, I want to address something that came up in the comment section of my Wrench Rants vid. I don't want to take too much time on it. But, before I do say anything regarding what actually happened, the White Knight that appeared of John's in the comment section of that video turned it into my most viewed video ever. So, thank you for that. I'm sure it wasn't his intent, but a flame war does get me views. It's just the nature of YouTube. But what I really wanted to talk about was a couple things. A little bit of my own personal credentials when it comes to reviewing books. But before I do that, I want to kind of set the scene by refuting an argument that the White Knights seem to be really, really fond of. I wish I had the actual quote here. It's not that big of a deal because the argument based around it can be used anywhere, but its effects are about the same. So the argument goes something like this. How can you critique a book if you haven't published one yourself? Or something along those lines. Don't critique a book if you haven't published something. Have you published a book? No? Well, then you have no right to critique this book. There's a couple things wrong with this that are just... well, if this were the Bismarck, it would have been torpedoed. If this were a fencing match, you would have just stabbed the guy through the heart. The problem with this particular argument is essentially because it can be applied to almost anything in similarly ridiculous fashions. Now, let's use John's example. I'm sure he's not very fond of the current United States President, President Obama. By this line of reasoning, by this line of argumentation, if you're not a politician, you can't critique the president. Or if you're not a president or have been a president, you can't critique our current president. Or if you're not a director, you cannot critique the direction that occurs in a movie. If you're not an actor yourself, you cannot critique an actor, which kind of makes the Gal Gadot argument for me, doesn't it? But when someone uses this argument on me, it doesn't really work. Primarily because, and I didn't want to put this out in the open because there's no point to it. My own credentials are meaningless when it comes to reviewing books, as with anybody. This is why I would suggest anyone out there who wants to review this book, go ahead and review it. Review it openly, review it honestly. That's the only thing that I would say is necessary. Being open and honest. But I've kind of beat around the bush enough. I am a published writer. Simple as that. Now, it's not the same kind of Amazon publishing where you just pay $5 and you can publish your own work. I'm published in the Bulletin of the Geological Society of America. What does that mean? It means I do science for a living. It means I do geologic science for a living. And I don't want to go into any more detail than that. Because if I were to say, give you the article or the bulletin itself, you could figure out who I was. If I gave you the article itself, you could figure out who I worked with, what university I go to, and through that, all of this information about me that I really don't want necessarily out online yet. Who knows? I might put it out at some point in the future. But of course, this all came up by this guy saying, oh, I'm a coward for wearing my mask. For those of you who care enough, for those of you who care enough to know as to why I'm doing this, it allows me to choose my own battles. It allows me to limit where I discuss John's mendacity and his stupidity to here on YouTube. I don't want people coming around my Facebook page and messing with me. I mean, it's as simple as that. I just felt like it would be more convenient like this. So, again, and that's... I could go more into the detail of why this argument is crap, but I think I've gone into that enough, and I've given a little bit of information about myself, so I hope you I hope you find that interesting at least. So, but I'd like to say one more thing before I get started, and yes, I do want to make this a reading. I would like to do some quote-unquote pure readings in the near future. These are going to be readings that don't have any of my commentary, which are literally just longer sections of the book read for you guys. The reasons for this is twofold, and the first is I want to get through more of this book at a time. And the sections that I'm thinking of doing these pure readings of are not necessarily straight up bad, but they're mediocre at best. So I'll read through those just to get through them. And if you guys want to comment on them, feel free. But I also don't want this to be a 100 video series, because if I do 1% a week of the total reading that I have, it'll take me 100 weeks to finish this. That's almost 2 years. And I don't want to spend 2 years on this book. It's not worth it. I'm dedicated, but I'm not that dedicated. So I'm going to try to start knocking out these longer readings, maybe midweek readings of just the mediocre parts. But I've got to get to them first. So, okay, that's it. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, queries, leave them in the comments section. And don't hesitate to like, subscribe, what have you. Thanks again for coming by. But now let's get into the reading again. I've got my reading here. Oops. This book jumped me forward to my latest position. But when we left off, Morgalla had descended into just complete hysterics for killing off a couple of demons. For killing off demons that, well, doing something that she's done as she did most every day, using John's own words there. But it was also an attempt to get us emotionally attached to the character of Morgalla. Didn't work on me. I'm sure it didn't work on you. But we also found out a little bit of what makes her happy, what she does in her free time, that her closet is not really a closet in the truest possible sense, that it's more of a single room apartment. But now it's time, I think, to meet Delilah, one of the only other characters of actual merit in this book that actually deals with Jasper and Morgalla on a fairly regular basis. Where are you? Here we are. But anyway, here we go. I'm going to start with the Sunshine Chocolate Puppies line as I ended on last time. Can't grammar with this thing on. Okay. Sunshine, chocolate, puppies. There was a knock at the door. Knowing who it was, Morgalla walked up and opened it without fear. A figure cloaked in shadow stood before her, tall, proud, and confident. "And where were you today?" The figure spoke with a voice as smooth as velvet and filled with confidence. "I had business to take care of," Morgalla replied, choosing her words carefully. She could tell if I were lying. Italics. "But of course." Delilah stepped forward and removed her hood. Stepping into the low light, her face was presented. Her skin was a dark pink, almost crimson, with scales that were smooth to the touch. Her face was very human-like, with nose, lips, and eyes all where they should be. Her features were striking, lovely, and yet vicious, like a predator. Her ears were large, pointed, and decorated with many piercings of gold. Her full dark red lips hid a beautiful set of fangs, and her eyes shone like gold in the low light. Her hair was long and as white as snow, and it flowed in waves down her back. Like Morgalla, she had horns, but they were like ivory and extended horizontally from her temples. Also, like Morgalla, she had the physique of a warrior, one who spent most of her days in battle. Unlike Morgalla, she had the desire to kill and conquer. Lord Zorach saw that you were missing today, she said, which made Morgalla's heart sink. I'll deal with that, Morgalla replied with fake confidence, looking off to the side as if she were a little girl in trouble at school. Don't be a fool, Delilah was stern this time, spinning around and looking down at the much shorter woman. What possible excuse could you have for missing the conquest of Veridur? It was a world that took close to a century to conquer. Delilah, I said I will deal with it. Morgalla sat back down on the bed. Delilah took her place next to her. You play a dangerous game, Morgalla. If it were being played with anyone else, I would be impressed. It's not your problem to solve anymore. Delilah gave a look of disapproval. She knew further words would be pointless. From under her cloak came not a hand, but a claw. It appeared deadly, yet was soft and delicate like a woman's hand. She placed a cigarette in her mouth, but did not use a lighter. The tips of her fingers and claws, which glowed with flame, and the cigarette between her lips was lit. She took a long drag and exhaled straight up. The cloud of smoke appeared gold in the light. From under her cloak again came 2 more claws. These, however, only had 2 large fingers, grotesque by human standards. Upon further inspection, one would find that they were attached not arms but wings, a blessing from her ancestor. They extended from her back, but she often used them as a second pair of hands when she wasn't flying. The cigarette gripped by the 2 fingers, they sat and enjoyed the silence for a moment. Delilah's 2 normal hands rested on her knees. Morgalla happened to notice a wound in the claw of her friend's wing. There was a large hole. Burns surrounded the edge of the wound. Morgalla could smell the injury, as she looked on in shock. What happened? Morgalla asked. Oh, damn human weapon. Deadlier one than on other worlds. It was one of those that fire, they're like lightning bolts. Lasers? Yes, Delilah remembered. She moved her wing to look at the wound, squinting from the slight sear of the injury. Damn laser. The wounds always take longer to heal. You should have seen Necrod today. He looked glorious. Did you come here to gloat about your glorious victory today? Morgalla's mood changed to one of sarcasm. Delilah was one of the few people she could be sarcastic to. It was my hope that you would have been part of said glorious victory. I was busy. I said so. That kind of excuse will not appease Lord Zorach, Delilah lectured, as she had done many times. She stood and looked down at Morgalla, who replied not with words but by rolling her eyes. Don't roll your eyes at me. He expects you at the castle later today. I shall be there. Do it for your own good. Delilah's look was less stern and more compassionate now. Morgalla could feel the woman's soul. It was filled with care for her young apprentice. I'll do it for you, Morgalla said. It was Delilah's turn to roll her eyes, as her wing hand brought the cigarette to her lips for another drag. Being with humans has made you sympathetic, Delilah commented. Morgalla smiled, for she knew the truth despite the words of her trainer. Delilah was indeed relieved at what Morgalla said. Sympathy isn't a bad thing, you know. Human invention, Delilah said as she walked to the door. She paused to look back at her apprentice. It's no coincidence that within the word sympathetic is the word pathetic, Morgalla did not reply, but only looked at the floor. She did not have an argument, and did not want to continue. She did not have an answer, and did not want to continue an argument. Delilah walked out and closed the door behind her. and the magical locks all took their place again. She took one final drag off her cigarette and then tossed it away. Morgalla sat still on her bed, preparing herself in a mental sense for the coming gathering at the castle. "Open," she commanded, and as she spoke the words appeared in bursts of yellow flame. "Delilah knows that I'm up to something, but I don't know how much she knows. I actually considered asking her to come to join me. Somehow, though, I know she would never fit in on a human world. She hates them too much. She would never be happy. I can never be happy here, but she would be the only reason I would stay. She's the closest thing I have to, Morgalla didn't finish her thought, for she couldn't bring herself to say the words. She fell back on the bed and her hands went to her face to massage the tension away. She was frustrated from the events of not only the day, but also the past weeks. A glimmer of hope had come into her life, but she had not worked this hard before. Her hands slid down her face, her weary eyes barely open. I hate my life. That's the section for this week. I stop at a section break, which we'll go into next week. So I really don't have a detailed bit of discussion that I want to talk about today, the longer bits that I usually have been doing in the last two videos. But of course, I'll go through the piddly comments. We will be talking more about this character of Delilah here in the coming readings, because Morgalla says that this is the only thing she has to a friend, or doesn't say friend, of course, but implies it. Delilah is the only thing she has to a friend. We're going to see characteristics in Delilah that make her inept or unqualified to be anything other than, well, a demon. And you don't actually understand, or you don't actually get what you don't actually get what Delilah's heritage is. I mean, John mentions it here, but Delilah is actually part dragon, part demon, part dragon. I do want to say one thing before I end, but let's get on to the smaller comments. First paragraph. A figure cloaked in shadow stood before her, tall, proud, and confident, and then the very next kind of sub-paragraph. The figure spoke with a voice filled with confidence. Redundant. Another bit of sloppy, lazy writing. I had business to take care of, and she could tell if I were lying. That's the next couple sentences. The demons don't actually read thoughts. The demons read feelings, which that's actually part of what I'm getting into with my reading, so it's a bit of a spoiler. Demons read feelings. They don't read thoughts. So I don't understand how Delilah could tell if Morgalla was lying. We start to get a little bit of description of this character. It's passable by John's own standard. John doesn't understand basic reptilian anatomy when it comes to his description of Delilah. Her skin was a dark pink, almost crimson, with scales that were smooth to the touch. Scales and skin are two very different things. Now, if you have parts of her face or features that were skin, and then parts of her face or features that are covered with scales, that would make sense. But if that's the case, John doesn't actually say that here. Scales are a very specific evolutionary characteristic, evolutionary trait. And it evolved atop the skin, kind of like scales on a fish. So just pointing out that John doesn't know what he's talking about when it comes to anatomy. Talk about her characteristics. Oh, also, like Morgalla, she had the physique of a warrior, one who spent most of her days in battle. If you take any of the deviant art or fan art that's come out of John's kind of deviant art page, you'll know that Morgalla does not have the physique of a warrior. Morgalla has the physique of a bodybuilder. A warrior is toned, but not egregiously over-muscled, like Morgalla is often portrayed. So, a couple of the pictures of Delilah, a couple of the pictures of Morgalla do show them with what you would probably consider more of a warrior figure, but Conflicting signals once again. John's writing, everybody. Another Little Mermaid reference in what I saw. Lord Zorach saw that you were missing today. She said, which made Morgalla's heart sink. It just made me think of Ariel again. Lasers. A human world with lasers is this Veridur place. And we don't know, of course, what the demons are using when it comes to weaponry. We don't know what they're using when it comes to technology. You don't have more than the guards at the front of the gate of Zorach's castle, at least yet, that wear armor with spears. An armed force with lasers a fraction of that size could just cut down dozens, hundreds, thousands of demons wearing armor and chucking spears. So, more details required here to make it mean anything, make it make sense. And, I mean, lasers. Lasers. There's more to it than that, but again, this is a shorter commentary. There's a really crappy description of the clawed, or Delilah's clawed hands. From under her cloak came not a hand but a claw. It appeared deadly, yet was soft and delicate, like a woman's hand. This, in my opinion, goes in direct contradiction. That one part of the sentence directly contradicts the other. Deadly and delicate really don't strike me as similar. Now, deadly and... I'll use the description of a stiletto, which is about a knife about this long. The blade is about this long with a shortish hilt. Excuse me. This is a slight, slim, I would say almost delicate looking blade with, I'd call it deadly as well. But I don't see how this translates into a claw or something that you would find on a half dragon, half demon. Okay, again, just my commentary. The cigarettes are cigarettes here in hell. Again, we don't know where hell grows its tobacco. And she placed a cigarette in her mouth but did not use a lighter, because that's obviously what demons usually do. The tip of her fingers had claws which glowed with flame, and the cigarette between her lips was lit. More weak writing, but not only that. I'll just leave it at that. Talking about her wings, fingers grotesque by human standards. Again, John actually gave us the standards. Wings, lasers, gloating about victory. Again, demons can only read feelings, but it seems like they can read any kind of specific feeling where it's convenient. Whereas Delilah couldn't read Morgalla's attempt at deceit here earlier in the book. I mean, because that's technically a feeling, wanting to deceive or desire to deceive. Morgalla could feel Delilah's care for her apprentice. So it's, again, just a kind of a mixed bag there. Oh, Delilah doesn't know the origin of words. Sympathetic. Pathetic is not a root word for sympathetic. The conjugation of this particular word was based on sympathy. Sympathetic. It's... So either John's doing this intentionally to kind of show us how clueless Delilah is about words in general, or he's trying to make it sound like Delilah's a douche. Like, sympathetic. Pathetic is part of that word. I'm going to put up a link to how this word came about. Sympathetic. Just, meh. One thing that I do want to talk about, and this is kind of the quote-unquote long conversation that I want to have. Morgalla sees Delilah as her friend. Yet a friend will disagree, will argue, will call things into question when they know a friend is off track. Friends don't let friends drive drunk, for instance. But when Delilah is making this point about sympathy, or the word sympathetic, you literally have, in the next paragraph, Morgalla did not reply but only looked at the floor. She did not have an answer and she did not want to continue the argument. This seems to me that Delilah in this case is more of a teacher, less of a friend, more of a bully, or more of a teacher, more of someone that you don't question. And if Morgalla actually thought differently, she would have probably questioned Delilah's description of the word sympathetic. So, yeah, that's, again, maybe I'm being too critical. Let's see. We have a point in here again where John shows, or writes that when Morgalla talks to her diary, words appear and burst of flame. For the third time in this section already. We know that Delilah hates humans. Somehow, though I know she would never fit in a human world, she hates them too much. But Delilah is the only reason she should stay. That means Delilah means something to her. And again, we'll get into why this is not necessarily a good thing when we learn more about Delilah, and that's coming. That's after we meet Jasper, suffice it to say. And then the final sentence of that section, I hate my life. Morgalla, I hate your life too. And okay, this is one thing I wanted to mention, and it kind of occurred to me when I was reading a little later on. Morgalla is the daughter of Zorach. Zorach controls this entire realm. This is someone who is essentially a princess of hell. And due to the fact that John is relying so much on human culture to define what is occurring in hell, or how these things in hell occur, I don't understand why he didn't, or he made a very specific mention to this, that it is not actually how demons conduct their affairs. Morgalla is not a princess. She lives in a quote-unquote closet, a one-room apartment off from the main, or essentially in the furthest reaches of this castle. Morgalla is treated like garbage. Morgalla is, well, I don't want to go more into that, but... And plus, Morgalla says that she's hiding in this closet, whereas she's still at the beck and call of this demonic overlord. This is not hiding. This is just essentially having your own room. Think of a child living at home. They're not hiding in their room. They have their own room. The parents can still come up to that room, come and call them whenever they need. So, again, just a bit of a weakness in the writing. But this is already a 28-minute video. I wanted to make it shorter. It's not going to be. So, again, thank you for watching, everyone. If you like the video, comment, subscribe, all that. Tell me if I missed something. I'll talk to you guys next week. Maybe I'll do a longer reading midweek. But until then, guys, na zlarano, na zdrowie. Peace.